Hello everybody, Train King James here. I am excited today to do the Season 3 tier list. And Season 3 was a season I just now recently completed. If you guys didn't know, I'm watching an episode a day. I started on January 1st. We have completed the first 3 seasons. I've done 2 other tier lists. I'll make a playlist on my channel and probably link it in the description. Yeah, so if you guys want to check out the other ones, see how I rank them. I'm planning to go as far as of right now, Season 20, so it won't be done by the end of this year. We'll get around Season 14, 15-ish, but we're going to have a lot of tier lists. They're going to be out almost monthly. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get into Season 3. I like to go in episode order. The problem with, the way the tier list organizes the episodes at the bottom is that they are not in order, but that's fine. I do know the order of the episode, so we'll be able to do that. So we'll start with A Scarf for Percy. And this is an interesting episode. It's the first time the opening episode doesn't directly star Thomas. It's about Thomas and Percy together. I'm going to put this episode, it's kind of a lower A tier episode, higher B tier. I think I'll go upper echelon. I'll go A. I'll go A because this episode has an iconic crash, Percy being covered in jam and all that, and I think a lot of people do remember that. I think it's a pretty, memorable scene. I do think this episode was a really nice way to start off the season. I think, to my knowledge, it's like one of the few episodes, maybe the only one, that starts off in winter to start off a season. Technically, Season 4, Grand Puff starts off in winter too, but, the engines are inside, and this episode is, most of Grand Puff's, it's either in the sheds during a winter storm or a flashback. So I don't really count it. This one is an actual episode that takes place in winter. So I'm going to put it in A tier. I think it's a nice story. It's a nice way to introduce Season 3. Yeah, not much else to say. Next episode is Percy's Promise. And this is a really fantastic episode. I'm super close. It's between A and S tier where I want to put it. I'm going to put it in S tier. I'll be generous. I think the episode gets S tier because it's the first time we really see an engine enter water. And yes, Percy takes the plunge, happens, the previous season, right? And yes, he enters the water. But Percy is Percy is in the water. It's not like his buffers touched it. And, now the crew is kind of used to certain techniques with filling with water. And we see this a lot in Season 3. The elements of nature and water at play very commonly. It's very nice. This episode's fun. We get to see Percy, Annie, and Clarabelle together. Something we really didn't see much in the show. Other than that, though, yeah, it's a pretty good episode. Don't have really too much to say, and I'll kind of get to why. I don't have a lot to say on many episodes of Season 3, and this will make sense at the end. Next episode, Time for Trouble. It's the TV series adaptation of Double Header, from the Railway series. This is a fine Toby and James story. This was an episode I didn't really realize existed for a while. It's just kind of I think I saw it once, watching Best of James as a kid. I'm because I was for reasons, I used to be nervous about the episode James in a Mess, so I didn't really watch Best of James all that often. One time I finally watched it all the way through. And then this episode was at the end. I'm like, what is this episode? I never heard of this one. I didn't know they made this. And yeah, here it was. So, it's a solid episode. Not a ton happens here. I think I'm going to put it in B tier. I don't think it's quite bad enough for C tier or anything. I think it's a very average, basic, simple episode. Let's see. Where are you? Where is it? Oh, here it is. Gordon and the Famous Visitor. I was looking for Gordon. I didn't realize this was the image. I'm going to put you in B tier as well. I do think the episode is iconic. It's just not one that really resonated with me. I think this episode I kind of have fatigue with because I just remember seeing it a lot as a kid. It aired a lot on Sprout. I saw various, DVDs and VHS tapes. It's a fun episode. It always kind of bothered me that, City of Truro was just, a static model that didn't really move or anything. He didn't have a face. They didn't really make him a character. And that's a weird thing they did in Season 3, and they do it again in another episode, which I'm going to have more thoughts on. other than that, I do like the story as a whole. I think it really works well on its own. Like, I know it's connected to Duck and the Diesel Engine, but I don't think you needed to force this one in Season 2, and I like that they adapted it on its own. Donald's Duck is a really nice episode. I am going to put this in A tier. Really sweet story. I like that this episode pretty much just focuses on Donald and Duck the entire time and their dynamic. It's basically the two of them playing pranks on each other, and it creates a really fun dynamic between the two of them. They're both very, they're both interesting characters. It's the first time we see Donald really without his twin in an actual environment. The fact that they share this little duckling thing, and it's kind of cute. I do have an issue with this episode, but it's not so much with the episode itself. It's more the way the episode is aired. This episode is weird to air so early in the season because it gives Duck his branch line, and that's a very iconic moment, and I love the shots of Duck on his branch by the sea. Later on in the season, we get All at Sea, which is an episode that establishes Duck's love of the sea and working at the harbor and all that. And I just wish that, we get Duck on his branch line, and then we don't really see Duck on his branch line till, the end of the season when Oliver shows up, and I would have wished those episodes were closer together, like they were in the Railway series. So I'm going to get to more of this, because this is not the only instance of this happening in the season with episodes, but this is just my thought on it. Thomas gets bumped. Now, amongst my friends, this episode is kind of a controversial one, because some of us love it, some of us hate it. I have a very special relationship with this episode, because, this episode is the first one I ever saw of Thomas. It's the first episode that introduced me to the show, and it weirdly has that feeling. It has a very introductory first day vibe to it. Not entirely sure why. It's kind of a loaded story, because it's not super, character driven. It's kind of like a lot of events happen. Because early on, it's like, Thomas is getting teased by Percy, then he has to take the children home and he's late, and then later on he's on his branch line and the hot sun melts the tracks, and that leads to trouble there, and then it leads to Thomas being frustrated and he's working in the yard again, and Bertie's running his branch line, he's worried about this passage. It's a lot of stuff that happens in this episode. It's not the cleanest story, it's a little clunky because there's just so many elements. It's a very, story beat driven episode, so I am going to put it in B tier. I don't think it's terrible, I don't think it's bad or anything, I just think it's kind of an interesting episode to have here. Trust Thomas, another iconic episode. If I could actually select it, if my computer lets me, there we go. I'm going to put Trust Thomas in A tier. I think it's a really nice episode. It's not one that I'm super in love with, but it's one that... Oh, wait, why did you Trust Thomas now? It's out of order. Oh, well, we're going to talk about Trust Thomas, because I'm looking at the episode list, and I just happened to look down, and that was, the next one. So, we're just going to go out of order. It's fine. But Trust Thomas is going to go in A tier. Really wish these episodes down here were in order, but it's easier for me to talk about it this way. I do like this episode. It actually has some interesting bits of continuity, where it mentions, Percy goes to work at the harbor. And I have to do his job and stuff like that. I don't know. It's a nice episode. I like the crash. It's just not one of my favorite episodes. So now we're going to get back on track. Thomas, Percy, and the Dragon is an iconic episode. A lot of people love this episode. It's one of their favorite Halloween episodes or scary episodes. I'm going to put it in A tier. It's a really, really good episode. I don't think it's quite good enough as that S tier iconic. It's going to go here. I really enjoy the episode. I love the music. I love the score. It's like Thomas scares Percy and he's approaching. It's got that eerie feeling. Alright. But yeah, all in all, I really do enjoy that episode. Okay, where is it? Diesel does it again. And I'm going to reference something that I referenced earlier with Donald's Duck. This episode, I feel is kind of out of place. I think Season 3, and I had this problem rewatching Season 3 compared to Season 2 and 1. Season 3 isn't as well connected or woven together as nicely as the first two seasons are, where the episodes do build on each other. And granted, it's because Season 3 tells a lot of original stories. I think they tell the right stories, but it's presented out of order. And what I might do is a video about how I would order Season 3 and see if maybe that helps maybe the way season 3 is perceived, the order, stuff like that. Because, you know, it feels weird that, like, again, this is an episode that Diesel appears here and he leaves, but he makes several other appearances this season. So, you know, I wasn't a big fan of what he did here. You know, his role of being here, or at least in the season. Not so much this episode, I should say, but the rest of the season, appearing in Mavis, appearing in Tender Engines, and it was kind of weird. But this episode, I do like, but I am going to put in B tier. I think I'm going to put it around here. It's an enjoyable episode. I love the shots at the harbor. You can really tell that after working on tugs, the crew was like, yeah, we're going to go full on in with the... We're going all the way in with the water sets and harbors. We're really going to lead into that. This was a very harbor-heavy season. Say that 5 times fast. Okay, Henry's Forest. One of the most controversial episodes of the show, just because of how the Reverend felt about it. I think it's beautiful, and I think it belongs rightly in B tier. It's a beautiful episode. I don't have a problem with Henry liking the forest. I really like that season 3 is the season that we really expand on the character's interest, and we're kind of running to a string of episodes where we really get to learn something more about each character. Here we learn about Henry's love of the forest, and I think that's really sweet that, you know, he has something, it's peaceful and tranquil. You know, personal headcanon of mine is the reason why he loves the forest so much is because Henry, you know, when he was stuck in the tunnel, granted, Henry's Forest isn't generally around Henry's Tunnel, you know, depending on what map you follow and whatnot, but the calming sounds of the nearby woods helped soothe Henry in the tunnel, so he likes stopping in nearby forest, being able to rest and relax. You know, and it kind of gives him soothing, calm feelings, and it helps him out, you know, kind of like a Zen garden type feeling. So, yeah, I like this episode. I love the storm scene, and I love the very, you know, green, earthy, planet-friendly message this episode has about, you know, taking care of your forest, taking care of the trees, all that stuff. The Trouble with Mud is another episode kind of similar to Henry's Forest, where we really learn more about a character. Gordon in this episode, you know, we learn he just doesn't care about appearance, which is very different to other episodes we'll see in the show, but I kind of like that. I used to not, but I've grown to realize that it is kind of cool that Gordon doesn't care. He just wants to work hard. It is an adaptation of the Railway Series story, Leaves. It's kind of weird that it's on its own, but I think this one works better on its own than another one they'll do in the next season, which I think you guys will know which one I'm talking about. Especially because they cut a lot of the ties to the other episodes to this story. So, you know, I love the storm scenes. I love the shots of the hill covered in leaves. Where do I put this episode? I think this is another B tier episode, and I think I will put it here. B tier. I think that's where it belongs. It's a really nice episode. Not much else. I believe this is for No Joke for James. Yeah, I really like this episode for James. It's a great James story. This is really, I believe, the first episode that, like, really emphasizes James's love of, like, looking the best and feeling the best in his vanity. Like, we see it in the previous couple seasons in some ways, but this episode really emphasizes it, especially his red paint. And we see the lengths he's willing to go, and obviously hijacking the Express is, like, absolutely insane, but it was a really, you know, it was a funny thing that James did, and you know what, it didn't work out, but, you know, hey, it was a fun episode to watch. So, in terms of where I rank this episode, I think this is another B tier, and you're noticing a trend here, Season 3, a lot of B tier stories. I think I will put it here. Actually, I might put it at the top of B tier, actually. Yeah, I think that's good. James is he's a fun character. Love the story for him. It really, we start to learn more about him and really about his vanity. And I think this is the episode that really opens that Pandora's box to James. So Thomas, Percy, and the Mail, or Thomas, Percy, and the Post Train. One of the most beautiful episodes of the show. I mean, this one takes place almost entirely at night. Just these beautiful lit shots at night of Thomas and Percy working around the island. This episode bored me as a kid, but as you know, as I get older, I'm really more appreciative of the cinematography and the visuals. So I really do appreciate this episode now. That being said, I do put it in the B tier, probably around here. if I'm being totally honest, because it's not really like a huge, like, story episode. It's not like a character-driven thing. It's very much like, you know, hey, Thomas Percy, deliver the mail. Oh, there's a problem. The railway won't be able to take the mail anymore. But we're going to do even better at taking the mail, and look, we did it. So it's not like a huge story-driven episode. It's just kind of like visuals, just sit back, relax, and zen moment. It's a beautiful episode. Alright, since I talked about Trust Thomas already, we're going to skip ahead to Mavis, which is right down here. Mavis is a really nice episode. I do love the introduction to her. I love her dynamic with Toby. You know, the one thing I've always liked about Mavis is a lot of people think that, you know, oh, we're supposed to not like what Mavis is doing and that Toby's in the right and she's just, like, irresponsible. But at no point is it ever said that she's wrong, outside of when she ignores Toby's advice. It's more that, you know, I like to think that Toby's an old fusspot. Like, Mavis is right. It's just she's very creative, she's very young and interested and innovative, and Toby's not really like that. So I do like this episode. I do think it's better in the Railway series because the absolute humor of where Mavis breaks down relative to where Toby is when she breaks down. Because the problem is Mavis is coming from the quarry, and then she stalls in the crossing. Toby's at the quarry, somehow gets around Mavis, and then rescues her. Which, again, whatever. The show missed some of that stuff, but it's... Ooh, excuse me. It's fine. I am going to put this episode in A tier. I might put it in B tier after I just said that, but I think I'll leave it. Toby's Tightrope. An iconic episode. Again, everybody remembers watching this one, seeing Toby, you know, dangled over the bridge for the first time. I really like this episode. I'm going to put it in A tier. I don't think I really have to explain much more than that. Edward, Trevor, and the Useful Party. And this is another episode of Season 3 where it's very, like, a story-driven, not so character-driven. Because the first part is, you know, who needs help. It's like, oh, there's going to be a big garden party. Edward wants to help out, and he's upset. And Driver assures him, oh, we'll figure out a way to make you help out. And then Trevor's like, oh, we forgot to put up the posters. And Edward's like, oh, I can do that. And they cover each other. And then Bertie gets stuck. It's like, again, it's like stuff happens. It happens a lot in Season 3 now that I think about it, where it's just kind of like the stories are, stuff happens, the story, and it just happens to characters, not really because of characters. It's not like a character-driven narrative. Not necessarily a bad thing. This is a fine episode, but I think it goes towards the back of B tier. Nothing particularly special. Alright, it's been a while since we've been up here, but if you guys have seen my top 10 video, this episode belongs in S tier. James goes Buzz Buzz. I love this episode. It's hilarious. I love the jokes. I love James in this episode. Just a great starring role for my favorite character. It is S tier. No arguments. No further discussion. And I think we're starting to get into like the really strong part of Season 3 because we have All at Sea, one of the more beautiful episodes. I will say this is kind of like a Stuff Happens, the story, not so super character-driven, but, and I will say but, this episode is great. I'm going to put it here. I know it's a little bit lower than S tier. I know some people would think it's like one of the best episodes of the show. I think it's a really nice episode with a really beautiful ending and a really sweet moral. But all in all, I gotta put it here. I think that's a fair ranking. Okay, One Good Turn. And I think I'm gonna have a controversial opinion about this episode. I really like this episode. I've seen a lot of people not like it. I kind of like it because of how dumb Bill and Ben's argument is. The whole argument is like, you got in my way, when it's clearly whoever turned the turntable's fault. And it's just funny. I love the fact that before Bill and Ben even like run into each other, that like, I can't remember who's on the opposite side, who wasn't on the turntable, but the other twin, you see them as like the ones approaching. He's just got this like shit-eating grin on his face, and it's just kind of like, okay. It's like they almost want this to happen, but I don't know, it's funny. This whole episode, it's like this little petty fight between the twins, and ultimately I do like it, especially because I do like Boko in this episode, that he doesn't say much. He just kind of like observes what's happening, and he just comes up with a plan. And this episode has some like very subtle visual gags, because I love when the Fat Controller's like talking to the twins that like, oh yeah, Boko's away, like taking another train, and you guys have to take his. You see Boko in the background like marshalling his train for the twins to take. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know if that was intentionally funny, but that actually got me to chuckle. Okay. The next episode I'm going to talk about, I'm going to get some flack, and where I'm going to rank this episode. Tender Engines is going in F tier. This is probably my least favorite classic series episode. And I'm going to explain. Because I have a lot of problems with this episode, and I finally put together why I have so many problems. The sum up is this episode doesn't make much sense. Right? The episode starts out, Gordon's taking on Cole, James calls him greedy, Gordon's annoyed by it and leaves. Then Duck recommends that Gordon shouldn't take too much of the water because it might be bad. Gordon tells Duck to piss off. Then Gordon's just randomly... Gordon's upset, goes to the harbor, sees a visiting engine with 2 tenders, randomly thinks he'll get more respect if he has 2 tenders than Diesel's like, oh, that's not going to matter, because steam engines are, going to die, and Diesels are taking over. Then the Fat Controller basically gaslights Gordon, says, don't worry, that won't happen on my railway. Not, don't worry, that will never happen, or, don't worry, Gordon, we'll make sure that you're safe. Now, he doesn't really tell Gordon, no, like, you're safe. And then, of course, Henry's randomly upset. He's complaining about the visitor for some reason. And, this episode just doesn't make sense. It's just Gordon and Henry randomly being pissed off. And I don't really know why. And I have my Enterprising Engines book here in front of me, which the story is, the adaptation of Tenders for Henry. And I kind of like... The book explains all these elements so much better. Like, it's a very dark story, because it talks about, like, the genocide of Gordon's family. And that's a hard topic to get across to kids, especially because the show hasn't really gotten to that dark subject matter. And, yet, this episode kind of just tries to skate around it. And look, Scotsman not appearing isn't the worst case thing, but it's very weird to be obsessed with this visitor that has 2 tenders that Gordon has no idea who they are. Diesel just randomly appears for no reason, and I think he's the worst character to give that narrative to. I think this episode has a lot of problems, and I put it in F tier for those problems. And, look, not every episode's going to be perfect, and this is the first one we got as a stinker. And I legitimately believe that this episode does belong here. It just, everything makes more sense in the book. Like, Gordon's really upset because he finds out about what's happened to his family. Right, and that all of his brothers and sisters but one are gone. And the Fat Controller plays it very straight with him. Then Scotsman comes, they're reunited, everyone gets on so well with Scotsman, Henry gets jealous, and then, to make fun of Henry's jealousy, then Duck pulls the prank on him. So, it kind of makes more sense there. Here, this episode just kind of feels weird. It's kind of tonally all over the place. Like, at points it's trying to be funny, at points it's trying to be serious. It just never really clicked, and now I understand why. I think this episode's a mess. Alright, but we go from one end of the spectrum to another because we're going straight to S tier with Escape. This episode is amazing. It's beautiful visually. I mean, look, they make... this episode is a better example of how to take liberties with the source material. Like, Oliver, they literally make him into a scrap engine. And I think that kind of makes it a little cooler, a little grittier. Love the music. And look, those changes make sense to me, so I'm fine with them. It's the changes in Tender Engines I didn't like. I don't really have to say much. This is a visually stunning episode. There is a lot to this episode, because they have to pack in so much, because... they have to include the elements of Little Western, because it's like, there's not enough there to do an actual episode, because they didn't do Super Rescue / not really did Tenders for Henry. So, there's a lot of elements at play that they have to work with. All in all, though, this episode goes in S tier. Then we have Oliver Owns Up, and I think this is a solid A tier episode. Oliver Owns Up, where am I going to rank you in the A tier? I think I put you here. Really nice crash. I mean, everyone knows about it. It's nice to we get some beautiful Little Western visuals again. And it's nice to see hey, Oliver's a little bit conceited after this escape and whatnot. And, I don't have too much to say about this episode. It does a lot right. Bulgy, one of my favorite episodes of the season. I think this one goes really to the top of A tier, in my opinion. I really enjoyed this episode. I think this was a fun one. I love Bulgy. Just love how, blunt he is. And I remember as a kid, when Oliver hurls his insult at Bulgy, I didn't even understand what he was saying. I think I had some, weird interpretation of it. I didn't even fully understand what was even said. But yeah, fun episode. Love the visuals. Love seeing Duck's branch line more. And again, it's the last 2 episodes. I wish Donald's Duck was connected to it. Because, we go from Donald's Duck, and then we have, almost an entire season go by before we even see Duck's branch line again. So, more to that. Next, we have Heroes. And another really good episode. I do think it's a little clunky in the beginning, so I won't quite give it the S tier, but I will put it pretty up there in A tier. I think it belongs right around here. The avalanche sequence is crazy. I mean, it's just 30 seconds of pure destruction. It's pretty serious. And canonically, this is the last time we see the clay pits. Questionably, maybe it's dependent on what they were. I don't know. It's complicated. The TV series continuity is complicated, but I kind of like that this is a crazy episode that Bill and Ben are actually shown. Hey, we can be serious sometimes. We joke around, we can be unserious, we can cause trouble, but when we're ready to burn, we're ready to burn, and I like that. Percy, James, and the Fruitful Day is a very weird episode. It's a very fun dynamic between Percy and James. It's kind of stuff happens the story again, but it does feel more character-driven because it's both characters having karma. The ending is also just very weird. I just like how Thomas is, kind of being an asshole at the end, just telling everybody, we all learned a lot today. He's just trying to be a smartass about it, so, I'm going to put this episode in B tier. I think it's fun. I think the crash with Percy's fun. B tier is a pretty good spot for it. And last but not least, Thomas and Percy's Christmas Adventure. Now, there's a lot of ways I could rank this episode, and I'm going to be objectively fair to it, because I'm not going to rank it based on the horrific job, the hack job that they did to this episode in the US. I'm going to treat it as its original intended purpose based on the UK dub. And I'm going to put this episode a B tier. I think it's a great story. I love it. It's a Thomas and Percy story that kind of begins the season. It's a Thomas and Percy story that ends it. Both in winter. It's a beautiful episode. Not really much more to say to that. I love the visuals. I love the storm. I'm going to put it right around here. I think it's a nice episode. It sucks that the US never really got a good version of this episode, because in some way, shape, or form it's messed up. And not just messed up story beat wise, but editing wise. It's just very unprofessional. But all in all, Season 3, a very positive overall season, really enjoyable. I'm surprised, honestly, how many episodes were ranked. Really, I'm surprised nothing ended up in C or D tier, but Tender Engines, man, I just do not like that episode. I think it's a real sloppy episode. So, yeah, that's really my controversial opinion. So, not a ton of S tier this season. I will say, I felt a lot of disconnect in Season 3, and I think a lot of that disconnect just dealt with the airing of episodes and where they were put. So, if you guys are interested, I might make a video on how I would order Season 3 to kind of have it flow better narratively, and so that it makes sense. So, with that being said, this is Train King James signing off with yet another tier list.